Your AC works overtime all summer, so be sure to replace your old air filters with new Filtry air filters. They recommend updating HVAC filters at least every 3 months all year round. So order your Filtry air filters today at Filtry.com. Let's clear the air.
Wednesday, July 7th, 2021. You are listening to the Daily Dose Sports Podcast, and I am your host, Clint Daly, coming to you from the Mile High City here in Denver, Colorado. And we are back for another week of talking sports with a dose of common sense. Hey, happy Wednesday to you. Hope your week is going well. Hope you and your family and your friends are all doing well in this time. Hope you had a good 4th of July weekend. We are happy to have you here with us today. And I hate to say this, but once again, I have something a little bit different for you this week on the Daily Dose. Like I said, we just finished up the 4th of July weekend. Now, depending on where you're at, it might mean different things for different people. But here in the United States, the 4th of July is a weekend of baseball. It's a weekend of barbecues. It's a weekend of fireworks. It is a weekend auto racing as well. And this week on the Daily Dose, I am going to play an interview for you that we did a few years back. And I'll just ask you this personally. I would encourage you to listen to the entire interview. Because when you do, one, you're going to hear some very, very interesting stories. You're going to hear some stories about a different era in America. But it will also explain a little bit of what has been going on here at the Dose over the past few weeks if you have been tuning in. So sit back, relax, and enjoy our 2018 interview with a race car driver. Like I said, today on the show, I've wanted to do this interview for a long time. And what better time than right now as we begin the summer and we head into auto racing season. Now, you might be sitting there thinking to yourself, well, why am I going to listen to an interview with a race car driver? I don't care 1 ounce about race car driving. I don't care about auto racing in general. And I completely understand your rationale. But I'm telling you, this is a little bit of a different story than you might think of in the auto racing scene. Because this story actually doesn't take place right now. This is back in a completely different era of the sport. I do think you are going to enjoy it. Here is our interview with a race car driver. All right, thank you so much for joining us. I wanted to sit down and I wanted to discuss your racing career because you raced in what, honestly, it was a golden era. Racing at the time you were running, it was different than it is now. You don't have now a guy that can just get in a car and go racing. You got to have like $1 million to get in a race car. You can't do that. At that time, you could just go race and you got to do that.
Right.
At the time that you were running, it was completely different. There were way more tracks. There was way less safety. You would see some of the biggest names in the world that were running on the tracks that you were running. I mean, you would have some of the biggest names in auto racing traveling around the country to local racetracks or like a local fairground or wherever it might have been. And fans were coming out like crazy to see racing in that era. That's a totally different era of racing than what we see now. It's all money. It's all you got to have money or you'd never be able to do it. You raced in a completely different era. I would just want to talk a little bit about your racing career, though. You grew up in Colorado.
Right.
Where did you grow up?
I grew up in Denver, Colorado.
Where at in Denver?
In North Denver.
And so I'm assuming you went to North High School?
Yep.
Went to North High School.
Right.
Play any sports at North?
No, I never did. I was too little to make it.
Too little to get on the team?
I was only 130 pounds, so they didn't need little guys to play. I could play good, but they wouldn't let me do it.
Just too small.
Yeah.
Well, and again, that was a different era back at North High School. Did you grow up in a big family? How big was your family?
Well, I had eight of us kids.
Goodness. That's a lot of kids.
Well, my dad had 2 kids before us.
Okay.
With another wife.
Okay.
And then we had, Don was the oldest of, he was the oldest, and he was a race driver, a good race driver.
Okay, so is that how you actually got your foot in the door? Is that how you got started because your brother was driving?
Yes.
And what was he driving?
He was driving midgets, and he started here in Denver. He ran the first race that Lakeside ever run, and then he ran at Lakeside that year. And then he went up to the Northwest and raced from California to Canada on the tracks up back and forth through there. And then he came back in 46 and started running midgets at Lakeside again.
Okay.
Until he finally retired racing.
Now, for some of our listeners, they might not know what a midget race car is. A midget race car, and we're trying to lay this out for you. You might think of the old 60s kind of roadsters that we saw at Indianapolis or that kind of thing. It's a smaller version of that, though, right?
Right.
And these are little cars. They're lighter cars.
Yeah.
But they pack a lot of horsepower in those little cars.
Oh, they had Offie engines in most of them at this time. After the war, they started using Offie engines.
So they're running Offenhauser engines. Any idea the kind of horsepower those little dudes are putting out?
I can't remember now. But
they were powerful little cars,
They was goers, yeah.
No roll bars on these cars, just an open cockpit car. You got in. They're wearing what? Overalls and a baseball hat? What are you wearing when at that time that your brother starts driving? What are they wearing as far as a race car, a race driving outfit? What are they wearing?
Jeans and T-shirt.
Did they put anything on their head? Did they put like a pilot's cap or something on their head instead of goggles?
They did have helmets.
Okay.
At that time.
Leather or like a helmet?
There was real helmets.
They were hard shell helmets.
By the time Don was driving, they was running real helmets. So not good ones, but helmets.
So how do you get in a car? How do you get to drive? Who puts you in a car just because you were around your brother and they said, well, we've seen your brother drive, so they're going to let you drive it? How did they do that?
Well, I was helping my brother on his car in the pits, and he come over to me one day and says, hey, come with me. And so I went with him. He says, climb in this car. And I said, okay. I climbed in, and he says, here, put this helmet on. Helmet on? Yeah. I said, okay. So I put the helmet on, and he says, now go out there. He says, go out and qualify because practice is over already. You got to go just out and qualify.
So again, if you're not familiar, what they'd do is they'd go out and they'd warm up the car, run some hot laps and get the car warmed up. And now you get to qualify and see where you're going to start in maybe a heat race or something like that, I'm assuming. He told you just to go qualify. You don't get to warm up or anything, just go qualify?
No, they hurt themselves or something, couldn't run, so he asked Don if they know somebody that could drive. And he said, yeah, I got somebody that can drive. And he took me over there and got me in the car and says, go for it. He made sure I was buckled in, and he said, go for it. Of course, I'd been around racing enough to know what you had to do to keep from getting killed.
Had you driven a car at all? Had you driven like on a track at any time?
No.
This was the first time?
Yeah, I just was around racing.
You're going to go qualify a car. You've never driven a car before.
That's right. As far as actual race car, I never had driven nothing.
Where was this at? Was this at Lakeside?
No, it was at Inglewood. It was a dirt track at Inglewood.
Okay. How big of a track was it?
Oh, a third of a mile, half mile.
Good size.
It was smaller than that. It was
third of a quarter mile, something?
Yeah, quarter maybe. It was smaller than half miles that we ran all the time.
But a dirt track.
Yeah.
So you might not be familiar with dirt track racing. When you're racing on a dirt track, you're running down the straightaway hard as you can. You throw the car sideways into the corner to kind of flatten out that corner to make it so you can get to that corner a little faster rather than just driving around the corner.
Yeah, right.
You throw it sideways.
Right.
And then you try not to let that rear end pass you completely
That's
or else
right.
you're in trouble. And then you hit the straightaway and you stand on it again and go again.
Right.
But did you know how to do any of that when you get in the car this night?
Well, I watched them do it a lot of times, so I had an idea what they did.
But you hadn't done it yourself.
Had never did.
Do you remember the car? Do you remember what the car was that you drove?
Not for sure.
No.
It was I can't remember.
But they throw you in this car.
Yeah.
And they say go qualify the thing.
Yeah.
How'd you do? Are you scared to death to get in the thing, or were you comfortable enough that you felt like...
I felt like I could do it.
Okay.
I mean, I'd been around him enough to know that you got to use your head. You can't just go out and be crazy like most of the guys that started would just go out and crash the first night or something.
Sure.
Because they didn't have enough brains to keep your foot out. Sometimes you don't stand on it all the time. You got to back off and be careful.
Right.
You know.
So you go out to qualify it. How does it go?
It went good. I qualified. I forgot where, but I did make the program.
You made it.
Yeah, and ran the first race.
Are you just trying at that point to stay between the fences, or are you saying I'm trying to compete a little bit, or are you just trying to kind of figure out what you're doing?
Well, I wasn't really standing on hard. I was just using my head and keeping on the track.
Sure.
But I did throw it and drive through the corners like I seen them do.
I would imagine that helped a ton, having your brother who can kind of tell you, hey, here's what to look for, here's what to watch for. I would imagine that changed a lot for you.
And he was good.
Yeah.
he knew what to do and how to do it.
So you run your first race.
Yeah.
And how did you do? Do you remember how you did?
Not for sure, but I finished.
You finished the race and didn't end up on your head.
Yeah,
which is a plus. So when that race ends, do you have a ride, or is anyone looking at you saying, "Hey, like maybe you can drive this thing"?
No,
you didn't.
No, I didn't have a ride.
So what'd they do when you got done? It just went back to the previous driver?
Well, probably. I don't know for sure. But anyways, I bought a car.
Was that your next ride? Was a car that you bought?
Yeah, an old car that was somebody was trying to get rid of, and I bought it. And
what was the car? What car did you buy?
It was an old homemade car that somebody put together.
Yeah,
with a tractor engine or something. It wasn't a tractor, but it was an old car with
like an industrial kind of engine or something like that.
They had there was a name for it, and I can't remember. But it wasn't an off-year a Ford. It was kind of an off-breed car of some sort.
Any good at all?
Not great, but
yeah,
it got me to run. And I ran the rest of the year.
And it was another midget race car?
Yeah.
Do you remember what color it was? Do you remember what number it was?
It was number 25, black in color.
Okay.
And I ran the rest of the season with that car and kept out of everybody's way. And I was... Well, the first night that I ran, there was guys on both sides of me passing me, but in them days, if you got a wheel between the cars, you'd climb a wheel and get upside down.
Yeah, so because these are open wheel cars. The wheels can touch each other.
Yeah.
And if they touch, it's going to lift one of you up.
Or if you can get in between them, you got to get back out without hitting them, or else you're in trouble.
Sure.
And I had guys on each side with wheels on each inside of me. But I kept out of the way, and I did make it through there because of it, being careful and not doing anything crazy. I finally got so I knew what to do and how to do it, a little bit.
So how long do you keep that car? You keep that car through the season? Do you keep it a couple seasons?
No, I just went through that season with it.
And then did you sell it? Did you?
Well, I just parked it, but I never raced it anymore.
Okay.
And then my brother Wayne knew a guy that had a big car that was racing up Pikes Peak.
So this is a champ car?
Yeah.
Or a sprint car, I guess?
No, champ car.
It was a champ car? Okay.
The size of the old Indy cars.
The old Indy Roadsters.
The front engine cars.
Okay.
And he told him, he was looking for a driver. He said, well, my brother drives. So he said, well, get him out here. Because, of course, I knew him too. So I went out there and he said, yeah, you can drive my car. He said, I was up there in a sports car, but I don't want to drive a race car up there. He says, that's scary. So he went and says, just meet me up there and you can start running the big car at Pikes Peak.
So was that one of the first races you ran after the run in the midgets? Was you ran Pikes Peak?
Yeah.
Before running any other
on
any other tracks, you ran Pikes Peak first. Now, again, if you don't know what Pikes Peak is, Pikes Peak was a, 12 and a half mile track.
12 and a half mile.
It was a dirt track. You ran up the side of the mountain doing the cutbacks and the turns, weaving your way up to the top of the mountain.
Right.
What you'd see at the bottom is completely different than what you might see at the top. You might see weather, you might see wildlife, you might see all kinds of things. But at the time, back in the 50s, probably 60s, Pikes Peak was a huge event. Oh. You had drivers coming in from the world.
Oh, you bet.
Big name drivers. You saw some huge name drivers running at Pikes Peak at that time.
Oh, yeah.
You see the Unsers. You'd see Mario Andretti. There was a number of guys up there.
Parnelli Jones.
Parnelli Jones ran up there. He won Indy.
Paul Goldsmith. Eddie Sachs. There's a bunch of them guys. I probably forgot some of them even. But they was all running up there.
Running up at Pikes Peak. So was that was your first experience in a champ car, was going up to Pikes Peak then?
Yeah.
So when you go to Pikes Peak, because you're not running like an oval track, you're running kind of a road track.
One person at a time.
One person at a time, and it's just a timed event. Who gets the fastest time to make that 12 and a half miles up?
Right.
On one side of you, you've got the mountain. On the other side of you, you've got a
Colorado
cliff.
Springs.
You've got just a cliff and nothing on the other side of you. You better keep it between the fences on this one, because if you don't, you're going off the end.
There was no guardrails.
No guardrails. Jeez. And you don't have roll bars on these cars. Now, this car that you got, the champ car, what do you remember about it? Do you remember?
I drove for Kingsley a couple of years.
Paul Kingsley?
Yeah.
Okay.
I drove his car for a couple of years up there. The first year I qualified, and then the next day one of the hot dogs beat me out. And
Who was that? Do you remember?
Earl Kuba. He'd been
Okay.
there for quite a few years, and he knew the road, and so he beat me out, and I didn't get a run that year. I just qualified, but I did get clear through the qualifying without crashing.
Well, yeah, and that's a scary track because it is dirt. You're going on these cutbacks. You're going up in elevation a lot. I don't know how high that goes up, but it goes up a long ways.
Well, yeah, from 7,000 to 14,000.
Oh, jeez. Can you breathe when you're getting up to 12, 13, 14,000?
It gets where it's tough.
I would imagine that
And
it does.
the cars have a hard time, too.
Yeah, because the air is thinner. They don't have as much air. And
Exactly.
if you're running a car, if you don't have fire and you don't have fuel and you don't have air, if you don't have any of those three things, something's going to go bad. And when you don't have air, your car's going to definitely run different. Yeah, I would imagine 14,000 feet's a huge difference up there.
Oh, yeah.
How do you practice for that? Do you just go up and run sections of it, or how do you practice to run at Pikes Peak?
Well, they'd give you a certain area, and you run that for one day, and you go to another area and run that.
And just practice it?
And practicing to get ready for qualifying.
Okay.
And then when you qualify from the starting line to the halfway mark, and that's your qualifying.
That's your qualifying? Just half of it?
Yeah.
So how did your first race up at Pikes Peak, do you remember how you did?
Well, that year I got bumped and didn't make it. The next year...
What do you remember how many cars they take? How many make it?
25 or 30.
25 or something?
Yeah.
Okay.
Over 25 usually at that time.
Sure.
The second year I went up there, it's the same car, and I qualified and I finished 18th.
Out of the 25 or whatever.
Yeah.
And but that's truly your first year really running it.
Yeah.
Because the year before you had gotten bumped.
Yeah, all I did was qualify that first year.
So then that second year, you're actually going out, you're competing in the actual race.
Right.
How many years did you run at Pikes Peak?
10 years.
10 years. Do you remember your best finish?
8th.
You finished 8th.
Yeah.
Considering you're running against some world-class drivers up there. And they legitimately are guys that we know. Guys, Bobby Unser, Al Unser, Mario Andretti, Eddie Sachs, Parnelli Jones. There's some big-time talent up there. Finishing 8th at the Pikes Peak Hill Climb at that time. That's pretty good stuff.
That's pretty good.
Have you been to Express lately? People can't get enough of their clothes. They're like instant confidence boosters. The jeans come in a temp control fabric that keeps you comfortable no matter the weather. And the t-shirts, hands down, they'll feel like they're made of the softest fabric you've ever worn. And get this, the suits have stretch and look sharp. Like, what? How do they do that? Everyone's raving about the newest looks from Express. Just check out the 5-star reviews. See for yourself and shop the latest at express.com and in stores. Have you been to Express lately? People can't get enough of their clothes. They're like instant confidence boosters. The jeans come in a temp control fabric that keeps you comfortable no matter the weather. And the t-shirts, hands down, they'll feel like they're made of the softest fabric you've ever worn. And get this, the suits have stretch and look sharp. Like, what? How do they do that? Everyone's raving about the newest looks from Express. Just check out the 5-star reviews. See for yourself and shop the latest at express.com and in stores.
Here's a different question for you. Do you remember the worst year you had at Pikes Peak?
1964.
1964. Walk me through what happened in 1964.
I qualified all right, and then in the race, I got up to 17 mile, and
what does that mean, 17 mile?
well, it was 20 miles to the top, and I was at 17.
Okay.
I got to 17, and it ran pretty good.
So you're up there a ways.
Yeah.
You're 3 miles from the finish. So
Right.
of the race itself, you're 9 miles up of the race?
Yeah.
Okay, so you're up there quite a ways.
And I looked down at my gauges, and my tachometer said 0. Well, I could hear my motor running, so I knew there was something wrong. I looked again, and I spun and went off backwards, end over end, backwards down
Off the
mountain.
side of the mountain backwards.
Yeah. Right.
You're still here talking to us, so I think we know how the story ends, but how in the world are you that high on Pikes Peak? You go off the mountain backwards, and like, do you just go into a ditch, or are you going off the cliff? Are you going off the edge of the mountain?
I went off the edge of the mountain and down end over end down the mountain.
What do you remember going off?
Well, when I went off, I heard a squealing noise, and that squealing noise was me standing on the throttle trying to climb back up. And then I realized that it was the motor that was making that noise.
The motor screaming because you're not touching anything.
Yeah. So I went and shut that off, and there's one good thing I really had going for me. I went off backwards, and I couldn't see where I was going.
It's like you didn't know what to be afraid of.
Right.
You're just along for the ride. As you're falling, can you sense that you're falling?
Oh, yeah, I knew I was going, but I didn't know. There's nothing I could do about it.
So what are you doing as you're falling?
Just hang on.
Yeah, are you flipping, or is it just straight back?
End over end.
So you're like cartwheeling backwards.
The nose would hit, and then the tail would hit, and the nose would hit, and the tail would hit.
What are you doing in the car?
Hanging on.
Is it pulling you out of the car because you're going upside down?
No, I was strapped in good enough, and I stayed in the car good.
But it's just pulling your upper body just up out of the.
Yeah.
So
we find it lit on the wheels.
I don't think they have. Yeah, I was going to say that. I don't think they have a bunch of pillows down at the bottom of this thing. I think you're eventually going to hit the ground.
It blew the tires when it hit the ground.
You land on your wheels.
Yeah.
Jeez. And what happens when you land? Does the car explode?
No, it just landed, busted up bad. It was really busted up.
Yeah.
Well, I got out of it, and they come down the mountain to help me. Well, I was out of it looking at the car, and they says, lay down, you're hurt. I said, no, I'm not hurt. I said, I'm just looking at the car. No, you're hurt, lay down. And
they're probably thinking you're dead.
They says, you're in shock, and that's why you don't think you're hurt. Well, the only hurt I had was a little scratch on the front of my ankle where the clutch had scraped on it.
And you land and it crushed the car, I'm assuming.
Oh, teared the car all to pieces.
So the clutch grinds into your leg and you walk away with a literal scratch on your leg from the crash.
Just you could barely see it where it scratched my ankle in the front.
How high do you think you were when you went off? Like, do you have a guess?
I have no idea. The mountains like this, you just go down and...
But it's a sheer drop.
Oh, it just end over end.
I thought the guy flying the helicopter had said something to you. I thought he had said he could have flown under you.
Yeah, that's right. And now that you think about it, when I talked to him later, he says, I could have flew my plane or the helicopter under you as high as you were, but he says you'd hit the tail and then you'd hit the nose and then you'd hit the tail and on down until you finally stopped on the wheel.
Goodness. Destroys the car, I'm assuming.
Oh, tear it all to pieces completely.
Do you rebuild that car, or was that you rebuilt it?
I rebuilt the car. I cut half the chassis off and throw it away, and the body and the nose and all the body works was completely
just crushed.
And the radio arms and all that, everything that holds the wheels together, all that got all.
I'm assuming that when you go racing in a situation like that, and it was always interesting to me when you'd go to races and you'd hear about people saying, oh, I just hope there's a lot of crashes. You're on the other end of it because you're probably taking friends or family or whatever to watch the race, and they're thinking the other end. They're going, I hope there's no wrecks tonight. I'm assuming when you went down to Pikes Peak that time, I'm assuming you had family and friends at that race.
Yeah.
Watching the race or whatever. What are they thinking when they hear you go off the mountain? What are they thinking?
Well, they didn't know.
They didn't know you had gone off?
They knew it went off, but they didn't know how bad it was.
Okay.
So when the race
who was there watching? Do you remember?
My brother was up there, and Neil Black and his family was up there.
Okay.
Before I married Neil's sister-in-law.
Yeah.
And she wasn't there, of course, but.
But you had family and friends there, so they just knew you went off. They didn't know what had happened. I imagine they got to be scared to death if they hear you went off, though.
Yeah, they was. And when the race was over, I hopped a ride to somebody going up to go up and tell them I was okay. Well, I hopped a ride down to see if I was okay. So we missed each other.
You crossed each other.
And they looked at the car, and I wasn't there. And then they didn't know for sure how bad it was.
Oh, wow.
So we finally did meet up, and they said, well, are you all right? I said, I'm fine. I said, the car's completely demolished, but I'm fine.
That is absolutely incredible. That's amazing. I want to come back to Pikes Peak in just 1 second, because I know that you actually had built another car for Pikes Peak. I'll come back to that in a second. You're racing, you get the Champ car, and you go race Pikes Peak. Then do you start going and racing in sprint car races with that car, or do you go start racing in other races at actual tracks, or are you just racing Pikes Peak only?
Well, after I wrecked it, I rebuilt it, and then I started racing at the tracks.
So you didn't start racing at the tracks until after 64?
Yeah, after 64, I started running the tracks.
You started running the tracks. What kind of tracks are you running?
Half-mile dirt.
Half-mile dirt. Where are they at? Were they just? I know there were a lot more tracks at that time. Now
Colorado,
you can't hardly find a track. But
Colorado, Kansas, Missouri, Oklahoma, South Dakota, all
through the Midwest area.
Right.
Just running wherever if there's a race.
Well, they had fair dates that they'd have a fair at a track somewhere at that certain thing, and that's where the race cars would go and race for the people.
So are you just set, like you're just going down the schedule and you're saying, okay, I'm going to race here, I'm going to race here, or was there a circuit that you ran, or were you just picking and choosing where you want to go?
No, there was a circuit. I joined.
Okay.
And I was when I did join, I ended up being the Rookie of the Year.
Okay. So your first year, you rebuild the car, you start racing these races, you win Rookie of the Year. I would imagine that you're probably a step ahead of all the other rookies because you've raced a little bit in the midget. You've raced up at Pikes Peak. You're probably a step ahead of the other rookie drivers at this point.
Could be, but I did get Rookie of the Year that year.
Do you remember your favorite track? What was the track, or maybe you didn't have one, but was there a track that you went to and said, I just run good here, I like this place, it's a fun track to run? Was there a certain track that always stood out to you?
Belleville was the track that everybody was scared of.
Belleville, that's Belleville, Kansas?
Yes.
Why was everyone afraid of it?
Because it was banked, and when you went through a corner, you went through it full bore with your foot in it, because you'd throw it into a drift and you'd drift clear around.
It was a half mile?
Yeah, half mile.
What shape is it? Is it an oval?
Oval, but it had big banks.
Okay.
It wasn't just a flat track. It had banks, and when you throw it into the bank, you just leave it in a drift all the way around.
Because of the steepness of the bank, you could just stand on it the whole way around.
Yeah, right.
Guys were scared to run it?
Yeah.
Not
some of
them.
Run that. There's a lot of guys that didn't want to run it.
It's just too fast?
Yeah, and I didn't. I never even thought about it. I just went and did it.
You liked running at Belleville, though? It
was fun. Yeah, I ran there a lot of times and had a good time.
Good. I'm imagining, because I know at that time, like we talked about before, you're seeing big time drivers. You're not seeing just the local yokels down there trying to soup up their car. You're seeing national world-class drivers come into some of these tracks and run at some of these tracks. Who are you seeing at some of the local tracks that you're racing against? Do you remember?
I can't remember. There was a bunch of them, and I was busy keeping my car running.
Sure. So when you're running, this isn't your full-time job. Like you're not like a full-time race car. You're still working a regular job?
Yes.
What are you doing?
I was a sheet metal worker here in Denver.
So you're running, say you're running Belleville, and Belleville is running what, on Friday night, Saturday? How are they doing?
Yeah, weekend.
So you're working a normal work week. You're working your 40 hours, whatever you got to do. And then how are you possibly getting a car and everything out there to race?
Well, I loaded up Friday night and leave, and sometimes drove all night to get some of them places.
So you'd work all day.
Yeah. And I'd drive half the night.
And then drive half the night and get there, and then sleep in the morning and then race. And then what, drive back straight to the job?
I had to sometimes. I had to get back here for Monday morning to keep my job.
Oh, my goodness. Now, you ended up getting at least a little bit of sponsorship, though, when you were running, didn't you? You got a couple of car owners that were kind of supporting you at least a little bit, or were you getting any help?
No, I wasn't getting.
You were doing it on your own?
Yeah.
That had to be a lot to try to be making your living and knowing, hey, if I wreck this car, I don't have that bailout. I don't have that money. These guys now, if you wreck a car, who cares? They go buy you a new car. If you wreck your car, that's your car.
Done. Yeah.
You own that car.
That's right. You're done.
Wow. Yeah, that's a lot of pressure. That's a lot of pressure you're dealing with. And I know a lot of people might not follow that kind of racing or that style of racing. Now you're racing the champ car. You're running, say at Colorado National, or you're running like a half-mile oval or something like that. How fast are you going? If you're guessing, you're running down the straightaway. How fast are you going?
Well, heck, probably 80 or 90 miles an hour, probably. Or
down the front. And that's
depending on
years
the
ago, yeah, depending on the track, depending on how big it was.
If it's a good long straightaway, you go quicker, But
sure. What do you think the fastest is that you went in one of these races?
Probably at Pikes Peak,
because you could stand on a little more.
Some long straightaways.
Yeah, you're getting up over 100 on some of those straightaways, I would assume.
Yeah,
that's awfully fast. And again, these are open wheel cars, and not at Pikes Peak because you're not going wheel to wheel, but at these tracks. You're wheel to wheel. If you get too close to anybody,
well, yeah,
you're ending up in the grandstands.
That's right.
Wow, that's absolutely crazy. Now, the cars you raced in this era that you raced in, you didn't have the safety features that we think of now. No. You weren't wearing these fire retardant suits. You weren't wearing, these approved helmets. You weren't wearing all the, you didn't even have roll bars on some of these cars. There was nothing there.
Yeah.
At the same time, you saw some deadly, deadly wrecks.
I've seen a lot of guys get killed.
Do you remember any that stood out to you or ones that you remember now?
2 guys got killed that night.
2 guys get killed in the same race?
No, different races, but one race got killed and then the next one come out and got killed.
Wait, but the same night?
Same night.
2 guys get killed in one. I don't know, maybe I'm wrong. I have a feeling if somebody got killed now in the first race, you're probably not running the second race, but this is a different era. So somebody gets killed in like a heat race?
Yeah.
And are you running in that race? Or were you not in that race?
I was in that race.
Was that that was just like a heat and then?
I climbed out and helped, me and another guy helped the guy out of the car, but he was bad.
Wow. Crushed? I mean, what is it?
No, just busted up.
Just busted up, but it killed him.
Yeah.
You get back in and you race again?
Yeah, and then a guy got killed that same night again.
How in the world are you getting back in a car after that?
Well, we was putting on a show.
You just block that out. You just don't think about that?
You just get back in and go, and you don't think about how bad it is, because if you wouldn't get in it.
I would assume that you don't get too close to other drivers because of that. Because night in, night out, there's that chance is there. Are you getting close friendships with other drivers, or are you kind of cautious about that?
Well, you know them all, and you talk to them a little bit, but you never do get real close because it can happen.
That is horrifying. But at the same time, there seems to be, maybe I'm wrong, there seems to be a feeling for all the safety precautions that they have. You guys didn't want those, really. I mean, yes, you don't want to be stupid, but you don't, because you wanted to make sure the best of the best were in the car.
Uh-huh. Well, the thing is, too, if you get it too safe, somebody's going to go crazy and drive like he's nuts because he thinks, I can't get killed.
Right.
I've got every safety feature in me in the world.
Sure.
So it makes you feel like, hey, I'd rather have it a little bit safer. I mean, a little bit
more dangerous
so they don't stick their neck out a mile.
So you were kind of okay with the lack of safety features because you felt like it kept some of the riffraff out and some of the drivers that shouldn't be there to begin with away from it because it was so scary.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess I can understand that. You look at football or something like that, and these guys got these big helmets and they got the big pads, and they say, well, I can just jam my head into you as hard as I can. It doesn't mean if you put the leather helmet back on to a degree, it's going to safeten things up in a way because guys aren't going to be so reckless. And that had to be kind of how you were looking at this with racing.
Uh-huh.
That's a deadly, deadly era in races, though. When you go out there, are you afraid to get in the car?
No.
You're not afraid to get in it?
No, you just get in and go. You don't think.
You just don't think about it.
Yeah, you just go out and race.
I would imagine if you think about it too much, you're not getting in it.
Yeah, probably. It's a race, and you go do it.
Yeah. So you raced. Started off in the midget. You got the champ car up to Pikes Peak, and you must have been running at least reasonably well because you win Rookie of the Year. You're keeping your car running. You must be doing something right. Are you having any success when you're going to these races?
Well, I'm going fairly good. I'm not winning every night. But I've got a car to take to the next race.
Yeah, that's always a plus. Are you signing autographs? Are you having fans? Are there people that you go to the race and they know who you are at all?
When the race was over, I had my ramps down on the trailer. I drove right up on the trailer, threw the ramp up and tied it down and left to get back home. So I could get to work. You didn't want to celebrate with the fans? You just want to get out of town? I didn't have time. I had to get back to work.
Did you ever have to sign an autograph for anybody?
I might have, but I don't remember very much of it because I was so busy getting ready to leave. I had everything loaded up at the last race, and I just drive up on the trailer, throw the ramps up, and tie it down and head out because I had a long ways to get back home.
Well, yeah, you've got to get back and you've got to get to a normal job and get back to racing.
And sometimes
to your job.
I'd drive straight to the job sometimes without even going home because I didn't have time to go home and come back.
So you'd take the car on the trailer to the job?
And park it and unload it that night after work.
Oh my goodness. Yeah, that's a whole different deal. You started off in the midgets, you go to the champ car, you end up, having to rebuild that car, racing on the sprint car circuit. Did you ever drive any other kind of cars? Were there any other cars that you drove?
Well, I drove the big stock cars every once in a while. We never did do any good. We went to the Riverside 500, and we went to the Baja down there in Mexico, and we went to the, a couple of races back in the Midwest there. But they was in the NASCAR cars, yeah.
And did you ever do any good in it?
No, we never did. Never could get going good in them.
Just not a good car, or was it a different style of driving, or what was it that you think kept you from doing any good at it?
Well, the cars wouldn't stay together.
Nah.
He wouldn't keep them good enough to stay together, so we'd have trouble with the cars. And
I thought I had heard that you had gone out to Riverside once and had a pretty good run, at least for a while.
Just till I quit.
Till the car shut down on you?
Yeah.
How good were you going until it did?
I don't know for sure. There's so many guys running that I can't remember.
But were you moving up at all?
I was keeping up.
What kind of? Do you remember the car that you were driving?
It was a Plymouth. Yeah, 60s Plymouth.
Okay.
Of some sort. Oh, Bill Maxton had them running and gave me the ride in them.
And you went out to, you went to a few tracks. They must have some faith in you that you knew how to drive the thing.
Yeah, we just never could get going. At Baja, we went down there, and it was a terrible rainstorm, and we had to wade into the pits to get the car out even. And then when we got it out and started the race, it was terrible rain and terrible mud, and we went 50 miles and finally conked out and couldn't go any farther. And the only ones that did go any farther was the four-wheel cars that could get bites on that mud.
Sure. So you were racing that car in the mud. At Riverside, you're running on a paved track though, aren't you? Is that a road course or is that a big oval at Riverside?
It was a paved track, I believe.
It was a paved road race?
No, it was a track.
Or was it an oval?
But I never did do much good there. We had too much car trouble.
Yeah. Had to be fun to travel around and take those rides though.
We went, that was the year that they had the first Super Bowl. And the guys.
So this is what, 65, 66, somewhere in there?
Somewhere in there.
Yeah.
And the guy had tickets for the Super Bowl for us to go to see it.
And you're out in California?
Yeah. But we were working on the car and couldn't go to see it. So we lost out.
So you didn't get to go see the first Super Bowl ever.
That's
because
right.
you're working on the car.
Trying to get it going so we could go to the race.
You probably should have just held on to those tickets at least. Those are probably worth $1 million now just to have the tickets. You can tell everybody you went. Wow. Yeah, I guess that's the sacrifices you got to make when you're trying to get your car together and get running right. You ended up with your brother building a car for Pikes Peak.
Right.
Tell me about that car a little bit because it was a completely different idea and you guys did some really interesting things with the car itself.
Well, we took a 6-cylinder straight engine, airplane engine, and sawed it in half, and then took the back plate off of it and welded it onto the 3 cylinders that was left, and made a 3-cylinder airplane engine out of it to put in the race car.
And then you drop it into just a chassis, and
we built a chassis. We built a chassis for it. In fact, we built everything on the car because we couldn't go. At that time, you didn't just go down and buy parts and bolt them on a car. You had to build.
So you're machining all the parts.
Everything, yeah.
And you drop them into this chassis. What kind of drive is this going to have? You've got an airplane engine dropped into this chassis.
Sitting sideways.
Sitting sideways, yes. Let's not forget that.
Had a chain drive back to the transmission, and then a chain drive from the transmission back to the rear end.
So is this going to be all-wheel drive, or is this going to be just rear-end drive?
Just rear end.
Okay.
But it's chain drive.
It's directly right to the wheels.
It wasn't a drive shaft.
Right.
It had chains instead.
How is the chain not going to come off the sprocket?
Well,
basically. I ride my bike. I can't keep my chain on my sprocket. You've got a race car you're going to drive up a dirt hill with.
We put a U-joint on the transmission so that when the back wheel would raise up, it would raise the chain too.
Flex with it.
So it would keep it in line.
Okay. What kind of size car did this end up being? I mean, was it a big, heavy car? Was it a light car? What did you have?
Well, it only weighed, when we got all the running gear together, it weighed 825 pounds.
Oh, my goodness. It's super light.
It was like a midget.
Yeah.
Weight-wise.
Weight-wise. But not that small as far as a car. It was bigger than that.
No, it was a big car, but it was with that airplane engine in it, and that the homemade chassis.
Yeah,
we had it down to 825 pounds, and it was it was a screaming dude. It would have went.
Did you ever get to run it at the hill?
Never. They wouldn't let us run it because they said it was too light.
I think that's pretty convenient for them not to let you run it.
Back in them days, there was no weight limit when we started building it.
Okay.
And they made the weight limit when they seen what we had because it was.
So when you're building this, Pikes Peak has no weight limits on the car.
No.
You can have it whatever you want. If you think you're fast enough to run it, then go run it.
Yeah,
you
right.
build it, they see your car, and then they put in a weight limit that you can't have it a certain weight?
Well, that's what they told us when I went up and told them what I had. He said, no, that you can't go. It's too light.
What do they care if it's too light? I understand if it's too heavy or it's too big or it's too, but who cares if it's too light?
A lightweight car will go twice as fast as
exactly. They care because they don't want it to beat them.
Yeah. Bobby Answers looked at it and says, you would have won the race with that light of a car.
Really?
That's what he told me.
Oh, my goodness. You ran a little bit with Bobby Unser, didn't you?
Yeah, I knew him pretty good. He got me tires for the hill climb that one year. I didn't have no... He'd come up and he says, hey, if you had tires on that car, you can go good. I said, if I had a spark plug brake on it, I wouldn't be able to run. He says, you go down to the tire shop and tell them I sent you and tell them to put some tires on that car. And he says, if there's a problem, tell them to call me up at the motel.
Bobby Unser gets you a new set of tires to go run at the hill.
So I went down and got them, and they put them on, and they said, now when these wear out, bring them back, and we'll replace them. And it wasn't costing nothing because they wanted to check how they wore.
Oh, okay. So they want to see how they're doing anyways.
If I took the old ones back, they could check it, and
sure.
I'd get new ones for it. And so I never had to buy tires up there anymore at all.
That's not a bad deal.
That helped.
Yeah, I bet it did help. When you're trying to just nickel and dime and just try to figure a way how to keep a race car on the track every single week, I would imagine getting something like that. Bobby Unser took care of you a little bit there. That's kind of nice.
And I could use them tires on the tracks.
Oh, yeah, so you could keep racing those even when you weren't at Pikes Peak.
Yeah, so that helped me a bunch.
Oh, I bet it did.
Your AC works overtime all summer, so be sure to replace your old air filters with new Filtry air filters. They recommend updating HVAC filters at least every 3 months all year round. So order your Filtry air filters today at Filtry.com. Let's clear the air.
New hot and iced Sunrise Batch Coffee from Dunkin'. A bright and balanced, full-bodied blend brewed so you can get summering from sunrise to sunset. And even after that, because that's when you can show off those string lights you hung in the backyard. Or rehung. Enjoy a medium, hotter iced Sunrise Batch Coffee for $2. America runs on Dunkin'. Price and participation may vary. Limited time offer. Exclusions apply.
You had an incident up at Pikes Peak where you slid off the road just in practice one time, didn't you?
Mm-hmm. I went and spun and went off and landed in a ditch there, and I couldn't get it. I couldn't drive it out of there. So I went and somebody drove down, and I said, when you go by down to the bottom, tell the car owner to come up and get me. So I was waiting for the car owner. Somebody come up in a brand new car and says, what's the matter? I said, I just need to get pulled out of here.
What kind of car are they driving?
Brand new Buick is what it was.
Okay.
And he said, well, I'll get you out of here. And he got in his trunk and took a rope out and tied to my car and drug me out.
With his new Buick?
Yeah. It was Eddie Sachs.
Eddie Sachs, who nearly won Indy in 61.
And then he crashed up there and couldn't run. And so he didn't have a ride. So he was just going to go up to the top.
Oh, so he was just driving around.
Yeah, he was just driving up to the top to see what it was like because he had never been up to the top.
Oh, okay.
But that's when he seen me and he got me hooked up and pulled out of the ditch. When I went back down to the bottom, they said, well, how did you get out? I said, somebody pulled me out.
They didn't realize it was a guy that was running Indy and was a champ in those cars. When you were racing at Pikes Peak, you would have different conditions, and you started probably doing something that was maybe a little more advanced for your time you started thinking about that elevation difference and what a difference it made. You started making some changes to the way you were driving and what you were doing in the race car. Mm-hmm. What were you doing in the car to try to help for the change in elevation that you were seeing as you're racing up that high of a climb?
Well, I had a oxygen tank tied under the seat, and a mask that I put on my face so that I could breathe and think better because of it.
Sure. And I mean, we know now how much of a difference, that little bit of oxygen does make.
Yeah.
As far as making a split-second decision, that's way ahead of its time for what guys were doing at that. Nobody would have thought to do that. You just get in your car and you put on your overalls and you put on your little helmet and you head up. You certainly aren't putting oxygen in the car. You were running an oxygen up in the car back in the 60s.
Yeah, right. And everybody laughed until Bobby Unser told him, hey, that's a good idea. We all ought to do that.
So you still have your old Champ car?
Yeah, it's still at the garage.
Tell me about that car. What kind of car is it?
It's a homemade car with a Lincoln engine in it.
What kind of engine does it have in it?
It's 341 Lincoln.
Okay. And it's the big Champ car. It's one of the big, if you were thinking about it, it's one of the big 60s kind of front engine roadsters that they were running. If you go pull up, the early 60s Indy cars, you're going to see exactly kind of what that car looked like. That's exactly what it looked like. You had that car for a number of years, though. And you still have it today.
Well, I kept it just so I could show it. When the roll bars all came in and the fire suits and all that safety equipment, I quit.
You got out of it.
Because I figured these guys are going to be sticking their neck out 10 miles just
Sure.
because they think they're safe.
Yeah.
So I quit racing right then. And I kept the car, though, and I take it to shows all the time.
So you can, if you're in the Denver area, they could actually probably come to, one of the big car shows. They might see your car
That's
out
right.
there. What color was your car when you're driving it?
It was orange. The last couple of years that I drove it, it was orange.
It went through a couple of different colors, and it went through a couple different numbers, though, didn't it? Did you change the number at all, or did you just change colors?
Well, I had to change the number because somebody else at the track had a certain number, and so I had to change. Sometimes I just add a 1 to it or erase one of the numbers or something so I wouldn't be the same as two cars having the same number.
What number did you usually run when you were running at the track?
76.
Why did you run 76?
Well, they wouldn't let me have 13, so 7 and 6 make 13.
Why would they not let you have 13?
That was, what do you call it?
Like a superstition that they wouldn't let you.
Superstitious.
I'm not superstitious, but I am a little stitious.
And they didn't want green. I did have it green one year, and
You couldn't have 13 and you couldn't have it green?
well, they let me have it green, but they wouldn't let me have a 13.
Oh,
on
you
it.
couldn't have both. What was that about? Do you know?
Just because they was all scared of having them at 13 and being green.
Both of those were considered unlucky?
Yeah.
We don't know why. They were just, that was an unlucky deal?
I think the green was because they say, well, if I see a green car, I'll think it's the green flag waving, and I'll stand on it.
Really? That's why?
That's what I always figured.
And 13 was just because people consider 13 to be an unlucky number, like they don't put a 13 in a hotel or something like that?
Right.
Really? So you couldn't have a green 13?
No.
Well, I thought there was some other goofy thing. You couldn't have something in your peanuts or something in your car or some crazy thing.
Yeah, they didn't want that around either when we was racing on tracks.
You couldn't have peanuts near your car.
You wasn't supposed to.
That's the craziest thing I've ever heard.
Well, that was crazy.
We don't know why, though. Just, I don't know, maybe somebody crashed when they had their eating peanuts in their car and running a green 13. So you ran a green 76 because 7 and 6 were 13.
Yeah.
And then you ended up going back and changing it back to the orange car that you had.
I painted it orange and kept the same number.
Okay. Kept it 76, though.
Mm-hmm.
Any idea, if you were guessing, how many years that you probably raced?
Oh, probably 10 years or so,
Yeah,
I suppose.
somewhere in there. You raced against some really good drivers,
Uh-huh.
both locally and nationally. You saw a number of great drivers that came in and ran against you. We talked about some of them earlier. Obviously, even racing with someone like Bobby Unser and Andretti and Al Unser and those guys. You ran against a number of really, really good drivers that would come in and run on the circuit with you. When did you get out of racing?
In 1970.
70, you started to shut it down.
That's when the roll bars and all that junk came in.
And that was why you wanted to get out of it?
Yeah, on the first place, to buy all that stuff, it would have cost more than when I bought the car.
Right. Yeah, you'd be spending way, way more money.
Just to get the stuff that make you legal.
Sure. Yeah, that would change things drastically. So that was when you decided to hang it up.
Yeah, I parked it then and never did run again.
Was it tough to walk away from it?
Yeah, I didn't like to, but I just didn't feel like I wanted to do all the stuff they wanted me to do
Yeah.
to make it legal.
Well, it changed. And at one time, it was a situation like we talked about where Here's a guy working a job, a 9-to-5 job and going out and then saying, hey, on the weekend, I'm going to go out and I'm going to race against some of the best race car drivers in the country, in the world sometimes. But it gets to a point where now the local guy can't do that anymore. Mm-hmm. And now the local guy, you can't do that. Like we talked about, you got to be like a millionaire now to go out and race. You can't do that kind of thing anymore. When it reaches that point, I guess it was just time to say win, and that was time to shut that down.
Mm-hmm.
When you're watching racing today, it's a different world now.
Mm-hmm.
The one thing, and we've talked about here a little bit on the Daily Dose, the one thing that I've seen is the lack of innovation that we have now. You don't have guys going out and saying, hey, how do we figure out how to make a car that could do this, or how to make a car run on this kind of gas, or how to make a car. You went and built a car from scratch with your brother to go run at Pikes Peak. You don't have that ingenuity now because every single car has to be exactly the same. It has to fit these exact specifications. We saw at Pikes Peak, they started putting in weight limits and all these things to try to make everything exactly the same. That's fine, but it doesn't allow for ingenuity. It doesn't. That's one of the things as Americans that we have always done. We've come up with new ways. Hey, we're going to come up with a way to be a little bit faster than everyone else. Mm-hmm. And it doesn't allow for that anymore, which is kind of a shame to see. We've lost that.
Yeah, that's right. Every chassis is exactly the same. Every body's the same. Every motor's the same. Everything on the car is exactly the same as the guy next to you.
Sure.
Which makes it so who can compete? I mean, that guy will go as fast as you go. If he can't pass you because he's exactly got the same as you, it makes it tough.
Well, and, we saw back in the 40s, 50s, 60s, even looking at just the Indianapolis 500, and you see some of the innovations that came to the Speedway. And you saw a guy out there running a turbine, or you saw a guy out there running a Novi, or a different kind of engine that they said, that thing doesn't have a chance. And they go out there and they destroy the competition, or they would at least give it a very good shot. You saw when they switched to rear engines, it was because one guy said, hey, I think I can make this thing work. Mm-hmm. And you saw different changes. I don't see that now. And it's too bad that they've barred that out of the sport because it just doesn't allow for creativity like there used to be.
Mm-hmm.
Somebody going out and saying, hey, I think I know a way that I can make this thing a little bit faster. You don't have that these days, which is too
engines, bad. They had a lot of different kind of engines in them days.
Sure. You've got about 3 now.
Yeah.
You've got Ford, Chevy, and Honda. Maybe you see a Toyota here or there, but
right.
That's mostly what you have. Yeah, it's too bad that they've banned so much of that stuff. It's too bad that they've gotten rid of some of that aspect of it because it used to be an innovative sport where you could go out and you could be creative and you could find ways. I'm going to figure out a way to beat these guys.
Uh-huh.
You just can't do that
That's the way it was back then. They got it nowadays that all you do is get something exactly the same as the other guy. Everybody's going to run the same speed.
Right.
If a guy conks out, you can beat him.
Yeah, if a guy
or
makes a mistake
or something. But
then you'll see a change.
But you see them all in a line now. They're in line and they have to stay in line because that's the way it is anymore.
Well, and to get too far out of line means that the other 70 cars that are exactly like yours are going to pass you. There's really no reward for taking a gamble and seeing, can I get by anyone?
Yeah.
Because if I get off the line, everybody's going to pass me and then I'm out of luck. So
that's the way it works anymore.
Yeah. Yeah. You were fortunate enough to race in an era where you could build a car yourself. You could go out and run it as hard as you could. You wake up the next morning and say, okay, I got to go to work, which I'm sure wasn't fun, but you at least got to go out and compete at a very, very high level. Raced in a very, very different era of racing than what we're ever going to see again. It's never coming back.
Sure. Yeah. And it was fun.
Oh, I'll bet. Yeah, that had to be a great time to be traveling to these towns and running.
People helped each other then.
Yeah.
If I had something go wrong with my car, I'd have another driver or owner come over and help me get it fixed so we could all keep running. But nowadays they all...
Well, it's teams and it's a different deal.
Yeah.
There was a racing crowd at that time that would kind of help each other out. You'd go into towns, I would imagine, and there's probably families and people that would try to help you with your car or help you with where you could stay or whatever you could do.
Oh yeah, I know. We had one car get broke down and they took it into a garage there, and the guy said, "Well, you can use the garage. Just lock the door when you leave." And the guy would go home. But he'd let us use the garage.
Just let you use the garage.
So that we could get our cars done for the next day. Sometimes you run a couple of days. You'd run 2 days sometimes.
Right.
And that's what we was doing then. We had to run 2 days, and he didn't want to drive clear back home and not even get a run. We stayed in there till daylight and fired it up early in the morning just to see if it would run.
How in the world are you racing a car? No sleep, staying up the whole night working on the car the night before. How are you even functioning the next day?
We did it, and we had fun doing it.
It's a different world. It's too bad that we've lost that side of it, but we kind of have. It's amazing that you got to be a part of that, because that really is a pretty special thing. And there's not very many people in the world. And that's why I wanted to have you on, because it's a different story. And anybody thinks of in racing now, if you think of racing now, you think, oh, these guys are millionaires and they were born in, to a certain situation. They raced go-karts or whatever it was. This was a situation where you just, one night, down there with your brother, and you happen to get thrown in a car, and you get to go out and run for 10 years. You race for 10 years at a pretty high level. That's pretty amazing to be a part of that.
Yeah, it was fun.
Well, now, for those of you who don't know, and I haven't made mention of it, but for those of you who don't know, we are having this discussion with Bob Daly, who is my father, and I wanted to have him on the show because I wanted to hear that side of the story, and I wanted you all to hear that side of the story. Completely different sport. We don't always talk a whole lot of racing here on the Daily Dose, but it was something that I was like, that is such an interesting story to hear about the crashes, to hear about the way that things were at that time and the way that racing went. You were actually, as recent as, 2012, you were inducted into the Big Car Racing Association Hall of Fame back in Nebraska. You're up for at least another induction, possibly, into the Belleville Hall of Fame. And we'll see how that goes, but it's got to make you feel at least a little bit good. Hey, you went out and you're doing this on a shoestring. You're building these cars yourself. You're trying to figure this out. You got inducted into the Hall of Fame. That's something pretty cool that a lot of people don't get to do.
Yeah, that's true. It was fun, and it was neat to go to the Hall of Fame and get in the Hall of Fame like that.
Well, it's an incredible story. Thank you so much for coming on, sharing your story, letting people know how things used to be, a little bit different, but letting people know that era is not forgotten, and that was something that was a little bit different that you got to do, you got to be a part of.
Yeah, it was great.
I hope that you enjoyed our interview with a race car driver with my father, Bob Daly, this week on the Daily Dose. Wanted to play that interview for you again. I have some news to pass along to Daily Dose listeners. My dad actually passed away very unexpectedly on June 24th. The funeral is actually this coming Friday, and that is why we did not do a show last week. It's been tough. Me and my dad were very close. And obviously, my primary concern right now is making sure that my mom is okay going forward. My dad was a tough guy. He boxed Golden Gloves. He actually made it to the finals here in Denver, and the guy that beat him went on to win the Nationals in Chicago. My dad taught me how to box, probably starting at the age of like 3 or 4. My dad, as you just heard, was a race car driver. He drove midget cars. He drove sprint cars. He drove a little bit of stock cars. My dad ran the IMCA circuit. He ran the Big Car Racing Association circuit. He even participated a little bit in the USAC, United States Auto Club circuit. He was named Rookie of the Year in 1965. He was a consistent competitor with those clubs, running in places like Kansas, obviously Colorado, Missouri, Oklahoma, South Dakota, Nebraska, just kind of all over the Midwest. At Pikes Peak, which was a huge race at the time, he finished in the top 10 3 different times while going against some of the best competition in the country and even in the world. But looking back, I was fortunate. I mean, my dad taught me how to kick a football. He taught me how to throw a baseball. My dad was a great example of how to treat other people because he was always so kind to others. He held me to some pretty high standards. He taught me the value of hard work. I called him after every big game, after big Bronco games or big Nugget games or just big games in general or a big race, and we would go over what had just happened. My dad was a huge fan of the Daily Dose. He would listen to the show every week. He would watch the YouTube videos. He was one of our biggest supporters, always encouraging me to keep going with the podcast. Keep going. Keep working at it. And I won't lie. Over the past couple weeks, it has crossed my mind. Maybe I should stop doing the podcast. Maybe I should just go on and do other things. But I do know he would be really, really mad at me if I did that. And so I can't do that. Next week, we are going to try to get back to doing a regular show and bringing you kind of what you expect from the Daily Dose. We'll look at sports. We'll try to look at it with a sense of humor. Hopefully be able to make you smile at least once or twice during your workday. I'm actually working on doing some different things this summer and going into football season, trying to work on a couple of different items that we're going to try to have for you here at the Daily Dose. I would just ask you, please keep sharing the show. I appreciate all the thoughts and prayers from you listeners. I thank you for listening to this show specifically, and I look forward to catching up on all that has been going on in the world of sports next week as we get back to doing a regular show. but I just kind of wanted you to know what has been going on with me, what has been going on with the Daily Dose, and why we haven't been doing new shows in the past couple weeks. Now you kind of know what has been going on. We are working through this and we are trying to get back to normal. Hey, I do want to say thank you to each and every one of you for listening to the Daily Dose every week. Thank you for the emails, for the texts, for the tweets. Thank you for subscribing to our YouTube channel and giving us positive ratings. Thank you for reading the articles that we post over on dailydosesports.com. But more than anything else, I can tell you every week, thank you so much for sharing the show. We love it when you do that. And I'm hoping to keep this going as we move forward past this difficult time. Hey, I have to say thank you to JSP. Could not do any of this without you. I will see you all next Wednesday. Have a great week, everybody.
Have you been to Express lately? People can't get enough of their clothes. They're like instant confidence boosters. The jeans come in a temp control fabric that keeps you comfortable no matter the weather. And the t-shirts, hands down, they'll feel like they're made of the softest fabric you've ever worn. And get this, the suits have stretch and look sharp. Like, what? How do they do that? Everyone's raving about the newest looks from Express. Just check out the 5-star reviews. See for yourself and shop the latest at express.com and in stores.
Your AC works overtime all summer, so be sure to replace your old air filters with new Filtry air filters. They recommend updating HVAC filters at least every 3 months all year round. So order your Filtry air filters today at Filtry.com. Let's clear the air.